Good morning, everybody. We're here in the morning of the 20th of June, 2026. We're here in San Carlos. It's a nuclei of Figueira, Immaculate House of the Relief of Suffering. We saw that we have an interesting topic for everybody, since this is a public sharing, and we will place the following impulse: the smile of God in the selfless actions of men. We're going to reflect around this topic of the selfless action, selfless spirit, as well as suffering, the energy of charity, to collaborate and generate a state of consciousness needed in front of the moment of the world and of service that humanity and the planet need so much. What we call or understand or interpret as suffering, it brings a characteristic of an exceptional situation, exceptional conditions. So many times we associate the word or the concept of suffering with pain, with loss, and many times it's an exceptional condition that places us in front of a type of a stimuli or a type of impulse that we are not used to. And this is eventually the cause of what we call suffering. And behind of this, had it been caused by us, by our initiative, or it was coming from something from our experience, in it we have a very deep learning. And this is the first stage of the sharing, which is important, because many times we hold on to the experience in itself and we do not ask ourselves, what do we have to learn from these experiences? And as eventually we don't go into that level of interaction and depth with this, then another suffering comes and then another experience, until we can really place ourselves in front of that learning. We have a lot of topics in the channel of Irdin Press in YouTube. We have shared many public sharings as well, with very profound and deep instruction from José Trigueirinho, who's the founder of this work, and who works many aspects of the human experience, our relationship with the planet, with the kingdoms, with divinity, with our inner life. So those of you who are just coming close to us for the first time, you have a very large archive of impulses, of language to be able to access and, let's say, nourish your aspiration for a higher life. It's very important that we awake or deepen to the following reality: the fact that we are always accompanied by what the spiritual classic science calls the great collaborators of humanity. Are you hearing okay? It sounds like it's a little bit low. Yes, okay. So classic in science mentions of what's called the great collaborators of humanity, who are some consciousness who have been with us incarnated here, as Father Pio, Saint Teresa of Avila, Saint Jean da Cruz, among many others. And this is why they know firsthand the experience of a human life and how to combine your own situation of a consciousness who's much more expanded of a normal consciousness with the human consciousness. By law and by destiny, in the East is also known as Dharma, those great collaborators of humanity, they never stopped helping the earth. Up to a certain point of suffering stops. So it's important that we as human beings, common human beings, we have a position and a posture in front of all of this, which is proportional, relatively mature, so that we can interact with those consciousness and receive their help. And in that way, understand as well, in a better way, the context of the world where we are, the planet, and the condition of this planet. So what we also call suffering from a different perspective is the filter that human ignorance promotes or establishes. let's say, and that makes it difficult for the higher energies from the higher levels can flow in a more ample way in the planet. So how as this abyss exists between what's superior and what is a human expression in a common sense, it creates in our consciousness as well a feeling of suffering, because we know that beyond that shade, something superior exists, that we're part of it profoundly, but we are unable to commune with it still. Or we commune with it in a very spasmodic way, in a very intermittent way, and that also is part of the learning. So this accompaniment from those great collaborators of humanity, it has as well one of the most important principles: to collaborate to dissolve gradually human ignorance. So the presence of those collaborators, of those great consciousnesses, also called as our bigger brothers in the aura and the inner part of the planet, it also says about a radiation, a presence of a superior state of consciousness that starts dissolving those veils and collaborate so that humanity not only awakens, but also starts to finally assume its role in front of the life of the planet. No, no, thank you. I'm fine. So, what we call the smile of God and the selfless actions of men says about us being able to understand and value a little bit better our own effort of the surrender of ourselves. Because everything around us sometimes is desolating, and human ignorance, we've almost accepted it as a state of a normal state of being. So up to a certain point, our heart starts getting colder and our effort starts also weakening. So it's important that we, in a symbolic language, perceive that smile, that occult smile of God, or of the unique life as we each can understand, so that selfless action could also have contact with that source of inspiration and we feel strengthened to continue. Those great beings, one of them who recently was with us as Father Pio, he experienced physical suffering even for a long time, for many decades. So under his perspective, that suffering, the process of the wounds, it was through his extreme condition from our perspective. He could keep his sight, his spirit of surrender and superation and sacrifice, as we will see here today, that constructs this matrix of a selfless consciousness that corresponds to an offering and a signal that great beings do when they are, let's use an incorrect word from a certain point of view, but maybe we can use here, they are saying goodbye to the planetary experience directly in an incarnation. As a last signal, those beings leave us expressions of their teachings, of their applied wisdom. Applied how? Applied through a life that we would call a difficult life, a hard life, a suffered life, because their dharma, the process that they came to collaborate with the planet, says about seeding the spirit of selfless action. So to look at the suffering from that perspective of preparing the expansion of the consciousness helped us a lot in this context here of the Immaculate House of the Relief of Suffering. It's important because we are building here a hospital who will be looking after a palliative care, who would have a lot of very difficult situations. Let's change the tense of the verb. It's already dealing with a lot of difficult situations because human consciousness tends to see everything on a three-dimensional way, in a very concrete way. And in general, we don't value and we don't make use the stages of construction, of maturing of something. We find something exists when it's ready, but many times it's the process in itself that consolidates the quality of that something. Can you follow me? So the process is the construction that consolidates all of which is the reality of that. In this case, is this hospital for palliative care. So this is a sharing which is not just public by the selfless action in itself, but also the matrix which says about this place. And more than just a physical place or a city, it is truly something much ampler, it's regional, because we're going to work. The service that this house is going to offer, it's going to positively influence many situations. We know that this topic, or this word, which is so shocking about this word, which already has a whole thought about it, which is death and suffering, it generates in us a paralysis, an impression of being stuck in front of something that we have no control, and that we naturally and understandably creates a bit of fear in us. And so this matrix of selfless action, of service, of looking after these situations that are borderline, it's very important because at that moment our human experience needs this matrix of the selfless action. And why am I reflecting in this way? Because in a moment of synthesis, and we have already lived many syntheses throughout our lives, many syntheses, but in an extreme moment when we're having a palliative care, then there's a type of pressure exists there which is very particular, maybe that we cannot leave it for later, which is one of our detours of our human conduct, no? That we're always leaving things for later. Charles Chaplin, who was a comedian, apparently says, careful about leaving things behind and then you will never transform again. So coming back to the context, that pressure of the synthesis of a moment of suffering needs us on the other side, servers of that situation who are forming, have the selfless action present. Because from that matrix that we will see, how it's built inside of us, that is going to allow the other person who apparently is being looked after or sees there a light of hope. He may find a horizon inside of himself and may not interpret or assume suffering as something that is, and can see it as something that's going to make it even deeper, that suffering. So we have here some reflections that we can maybe touch about, and we may together touch this matrix of selfless action. The joy of selflessness, it emerges when it's something that our soul, which our level, our superior level, our superior I, is ready for a gradual path of surrender of oneself. So selfless action is not something that is born in just one life, and neither comes from our personality. It's very important that we understand that so that we don't make a mistake of the origin of our selfless action. And here, in this case, we go through an instruction that is very important for planet and the humanity, and little known, which is called Agni Yoga. It's an energy that behind it's the Holy Spirit. So it's very close to the human experience. So there, a being there as also who was incarnated several times, who was known as Master Moria, with experience in Persia and in the East, and in other emblematic moments of the human experience, brought that impulse of the joy or selflessness. And the joy emerges when the soul is ready for the path of gradual surrender of oneself. So let's observe how we oscillate in front of that need, many times feeling a very profound joy. And there are times when there's something in us which is just complaining, I could be doing something else. Why is this happening again? Why does this situation doesn't change. So it's important that we see these many ways of how we have this texture of our inner world, because this is only a human reaction. The most important thing is to try to always go deeper and touch that place, a little bit more secret place that brings that joy. And we can only be in front of what is there in the world, which is a suffering that seems that it's never going to diminish, with that joy, because that's a more unconditional service. We will be united and drinking out of that source and giving it also in front of those moments of the other person's suffering. And that's very important. So he also says that some layers of that blessed stage can eventually project on human life. And that's the path of selfless action. It's also a way to awaken our consciousness for the common good. We know that the human condition that is and still is fed by that feeling or the identity of the ego, of identity that is separated from a whole, and that takes us also to a very particular suffering in our inner world, as incredible as it seems. Something in us also suffers because is almost pushed for that experience of selfishness, and the surface and an opening for a selfless action helps to dissolve that situation in the direction of the common good. Another point in that context that we can see, symbolically speaking, the smile of God, is how fast we can answer to the service. When we can see that inside of us we have an unavailability, a natural and genuine tendency to be vigilant to service, that opens us for a communion of what we could call, in this context, the smile of God. That's very important, because it is as if we were the greater part of our human time in front of a wall, which is the human condition, and not trusting that behind that wall there's an open horizon, bright, ample, with virgin areas, creative, and it generates a type of anguish. And it's not a punishment in neither level of consciousness for our human condition. It's only our experience that we make an effort to transcend, and this is an important verb, to make an effort. So we can eventually see beyond that wall when we elevate and we reach that limit of our experience, and we can see in the horizon the smile of God, that energy that opens in front of us, which is this what we call the selfless action. And this invisible eye that accompanies us, this eye is the one who's blessing our offering and nourishes and confirms our aspirations. If we come into this path of selflessness, and we're going to stop here a little bit about what is this selfless spirit, what is this selflessness. Inside the work of the hierarchy of that work that we represent in the fraternity and federation, as we know, we have the divine messages. Years before, we had a very important impulse when Christ talked to us about charity and about service, about the donation of ourselves, about surrender, about the importance of that surrender. And this is what we're going to see a little bit in front of us now, as follows. These reflections make sense when we accept or comprehend that we are beings in a continuous process of evolution. So we are reincarnating, we are evolving in this planet and in other regions of the planet, in the universe. I correct myself, in the universe, so that we can learn to evolve. There is not a punishment in this process of incarnation. Sometimes, in able to learn to learn to love, to learn to serve, and to learn to see ourselves as a particle of that smile, as the expression that we're using, as a part of the expression of that smile. So that's a trajectory of many lives. And the selfless action is also part of it. And this is important to understand this, that we finally awaken as humanity, as human beings. We make part of a whole. We are part of a great expression of life. And that what we do here, on one end, is the continuation of what these great collaborators of humanity are doing. And on the other side, what they do is what we cannot do here, being here. So, from one side, or an expression of that unique life complements the other. That's very important for us not to lose the proportion of where up to where we can reach. Because if we can only see ourselves as an incarnated human being, we can maybe lose the proportion and find that we have powers that in truth we don't have. And on the other side, we can become depressed, feeling that what we offer is not enough. But if we keep in mind that we are we are part of a chain, we are part of something much vaster, then it gains a different dimension. It does not, the size doesn't matter. The indicators of human references or numbers, appearances of what we do is not relevant, but is the quality of it and how selfless it is. So in 2020, or 2022, now I'm not sure, Christ was saying that the selfless action, that moment, that fruit that matures when the soul donates unconditionally without asking for nothing in return. So the selfless service has that note and that characteristic that we can recognize inside of us. How's that? When we serve, are we waiting for something in return, a recognition? Or are we truly doing that just to commune? Now we know that God, the unique, smiles when that selfless spirit expresses. Then are we doing that in a selfless way without waiting anything in return? Or do we have an expectation? And again, we're going to identify the heterogeneity of our nature, and we're always waiting for a gratification. This recognition should not take us to a process of feeling guilty or depressed or losing the spirit, but it only comes when it emerges as we come closer, to it, to the matrix. Then that which is hidden is going to appear, and it's good that it appears because we need to purify it, not for us to feel guilty or to make us suffer, but so that which goes through a service can be pure, let mixed with that filter of our human nature, because the human condition almost imposes a certain imposition of human condition, no, in our unconsciousness. So it's important that we understand that we are an helix of that chain, and what cannot be done here is done by the great collaborators of humanity. And on the other side, up to a certain point, to this stage of humanity in the planet, we also need to assume what we never assumed, the sensibility of one with the others, the transcendence of human condition, compassion. We will see also humility under this perspective of Agni Yoga as the Holy Spirit. We will see how the Holy Spirit sees humility because it accompanies humanity. How does it make part of this topic of selfless action, so on and so forth? If we could truly experiment and exercise that everything that we're living here has a continuity much more vast in a different plane, and this has, I did not want to use this word influence because it's a touchy word, but it has a repercussion that is ampler than here. Then it also gives us a good feeling. because that humility we will see, we will do then what flows and what happens, and maybe that would be multiplied in other planes. We have that parable of the multiplication of the fish and the bread. It's a symbol of that. It's what matters is not quantity, is the attitude, is the purity of the offering, the purity of the transparency of what we can give. So to know that our action has a continuity in a different plane, in a different dimension, and with a different amplitude also turns us more responsible, because we have to be more careful of what's going through our consciousness, our bodies, and have to be careful not to dirty that process. The consciousness of Christ also said that we had to be very careful so that our steps do not dirty the steps of the path. So if you're trying to go up the stairs in a bit careless way, we have to look after each step, because that step is not just for us. We have to look for somebody who's coming behind us. So that selfless action generates in us a care, a spiritual ethic. The Agni Yoga calls it the life ethic, and it goes changing our inner character, our consciousness, and up to a certain degree that generates also this perfectioning of our human nature as well. So here we are told that we have to have consciousness of that we have what corresponds for the universe as a continuity of the actions of the selfless spirit. So if we can reflect on this, if our life is a life with expectations, if what we live and do in function of an expectation, or if it is a selfless action. And we're going to identify in many moments that yes, we do have expectations, yes, we are waiting for something in return, and that also is part of our experience. So we should not feel bad about this. It just needs to generate inside of us a reflection, and the experience stops there. If it was just about gratification, or something, an expectation that was already attended, or if there was something else. And this is what it's all about, that we could be attracted to that which is beyond, and we will see that in that offering, in that surrender, in this renunciation that he also speaks of in these reflections, in the renunciation of the expectation, we will see how small actions multiply. In this parable, Jesus, in the right proportions, how everything gains a different dimension, gains a different amplitude, it reaches profoundly other levels. And to relieve the suffering, to reach these situations, these limit situations with a different law, and to attract what we call the grace of state, it's necessary to understand the mechanism and to see how it's so simple from a certain point of view. When we're going to live this mechanism, emerges in us. The point is that when we're going to live that mechanism, it emerges from us that heterogeneity from our inner texture, which is very resistant. And in the language of this context of instruction of Agni Yoga from Master Moria, he calls it the great negator. Negator is that which negates the existence of God, of light, or the infinite, or the different possibilities, and resists this whole process very well. When we find ourselves on a limit situation, or a moment of synthesis, being it partial or a more complete synthesis of the whole incarnation, or even a circle of incarnations, it is very natural that our consciousness sees itself limited in its concept of the world, because it sees itself that it practically didn't do much. It did not accumulate inner treasures and feels a little bit unprotected. So that matrix of the selfless action builds inside of us as well what the hierarchy calls the cooperation with distant worlds. So in the way that we serve in a selfless way, look, it's not something that has to be done in exceptional situations. Let's understand it very well. It can be done in our daily life. As we will see here in certain words of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, she says that we always are in front of a decision and an intention of serving. Everything is a reason for a selfless spirit, even if there's nothing or nobody in front of us. Just the offering, that position of the selfless spirit, already places us in front of that situation. So it's also a way that we construct this alignment with the distant worlds, the cooperation with the distant worlds. And according to the hierarchy, those collaborators of humanity, it is this alignment that opens for us the feeling of the memory. I think this remembering, this is a more adequate word, of our origin and destiny. We remember this matrix of the common good, this matrix of the unity of consciousness, and we find a liberation in the midst of that whole situation of synthesis and eventual suffering that we may be experiencing or somebody is experiencing in front of us. We need to also say that we have to be to pay attention that we associate suffering to certain expressions of suffering, right? So maybe here in this moment, in this exact moment, many of us have inside of themselves areas of suffering which apparently have no external expression, that we do not identify as suffering because it's very intimate. There's a word in English translation which is struggle. For me, this word has no translation in Portuguese. So in a situation we're placed, and that pressure there of that situation, that which is within us and does not present itself as pain or a body expression or facial expression, but is there. So a server of the evolutive plan, a server of God, as we wish to call it, it's very important that we learn something that is very forgotten in the East, and what in yoga is the looking. In ancient times, the great guides and masters of humanity, they exercise very much the sight, because in the sight is the expression of the soul, and the soul is not the person, it's something much deeper and has hundreds of experiences in this planet, and also receives that reflex of the experiences that are the deepest ones. And it's all that in our sight. So if we could have that sensibility, we would be more sensible to others and mutually more sensitive. Sometimes we are in front of somebody who apparently could be very happy, apparently disconstructed and joyful, and there's a tone there of suffering there. And why is this important? Because we spoke about compassion, piety and mercy. Because if we're not attentive, we're not looking at this human relationship, sometimes look at the eyes of an animal. Stop and look at the eyes of a dog that is on the street, or an animal who's inside a zoo, the eyes. So something that is already so available, and we can ask ourselves, and for those who have visual deficiency, is it compensated in the wisdom of God, in the economy of the universe in a certain way? Maybe in the sound, something there would be complemented that so nobody is excluded. So coming back to the context, we all experience in one way or another suffering because we're here under a wall. Can you see? We know that we are under a wall. Sometimes we reach to see a little bit over it, but again, human condition pushes us down, and it appears as this exceptional condition for the nowadays human condition, which is the selfless action, is a help so that we can stabilize a little bit more in that limit between the wall and the horizon gradually. So according to those great collaborators of humanity in this context here, Master Moria and Christ, from the perspective of humility, it needs to be accompanied by sacrifice, by the selflessness, which creates a condition, exceptional condition, for the human spirit. So everything that is superior comes from inner postures, from many virtues. It's not something that comes by itself. It comes with humility, resignation, renunciation, compassion, piety. It's a whole. At the end, is part of the whole, different phases of the same energy of love, which what we call love wisdom, Christic energy, which are phases of the same expression. And here it's been said that only a selflessness and sacrifice can illuminate the comprehension of what is the true humility. And on the other, in a different way, other great collaborator of humanity, who was here with us 500 years ago, San João da Cruz, said humanity needs to live the things that are in front of us just as they represent, just as they are, and just as we are. And in that moment is that God is happening. So we talk about God, the unique, the universe, infinite life. It gives the impression that it's something there in certain moments it's going to happen. But why can we not see it now if it's omnipresent? Where is the filter? What filter? Do we want to dissolve that filter gradually and learn to commune with this? Santa Catarina de Sena, 1300 and a bit, she says that Christ deposited his gifts, different gifts in each one of us, so that we would be forced to help each other. So see how there's a trajectory, a healing in the process of selfless action. We have a different feeling for this expression, actual expression, and learn also from that eye and see that sensibility to see what the other is bringing to me, and which is complementing the smile of God, because God placed it also in him. Because, or do I feel that I'm the only face that can express the smile of God? So these are important impulses that place us in front of this service, which is what we call unconditional. This concept, or this matrix of selflessness, takes our consciousness to a very present situation, which is in service, which is renunciation, continuous renunciation, a resignation with more consistency. And that event that we know as Jesus in the Gethsemane is very expressive of relationship with this. There is the matrix of resignation when he, even having the power with his own will and having taken a different decision, he feels the force of his own will, but he says, let's do your will and not mine. So when we are in front of a situation of another person, a situation that is not touching us so directly, that we call suffering, and we have this decision whether the superior will be done, or we sometimes are in front of that, of wanting to fulfill that role of assuming for another person what that person cannot assume for itself. Could you follow it? So the selfless service also has this occult force of a special grace that we could assume for another person of what this person in that moment cannot assume for himself. Can you perceive the depth of compassion? We can even live for that person what that person in that moment, by the condition or whatever, cannot live for himself. And this does not come from a part of a personal merit or protagonism. No, it comes from a place of understanding the common good and understanding selfless action. In another very important point is that the spirit of us serving without expecting nothing in return, it gradually molds us, even turns our brain more flexible and opens our consciousness for a different way of thinking. So some people ask, I can't think differently. It appears as if formatted. I'm an operational system and I just work like that. It's a matrix that does not allow me to think in a different way. So here we have selfless action, the spirit to serve without expecting nothing in return. And according to those collaborators of humanity, it can help you to develop and awaken in you different ways of thinking, more ample ways. See how important this is. It goes very far away from just a physical attitude, in a physical external activity. And to expand the way of thinking, it brings joy to the eye of the other, of the higher, who finds in our devotion, in our decision to amplify our consciousness, a secure channel where to deposit many energies and in that way relieve the suffering. This same work, the Agni Yoga, says the following: how sacred is the value of selflessness which opens the heart. Because in front of so much hostility in the world, in such conflicted humanity, first with yourself, there's with everybody, even with the air, human beings are fighting or coming into conflict. And here it says, how sacred is the value of selflessness which opens the heart. So always when we feel our heart closed, we have to ask ourselves, how am I in front of this service without waiting anything in return? I am living by myself in a building. So service is not an external attitude. If you have that inner posture, life will bring you in a situation of service, or your offering will be considered in a different plane or a different dimension. It is not just an external question. This is our inner posture. What matters is to open our heart according to these superior levels. Very well. In this work of Agni Yoga, which is an expression of the Holy Spirit, as I was saying, there are certain expressions of Christ that present as the one who's thinking. And here it says the following: he left the disciple in a farewell with an inner instruction at a certain point of the transmission of this work. And from this instruction is the following: may your prayer be, to you, O Lord, I will serve you in everything, always and in every place and everywhere. Allow that my path be marked by the conquest of selflessness. I will say it again. It could even become a daily prayer. May your prayer be, to you, my Lord, I will serve you in everything, always and everywhere. Allow that my path be marked by the conquest of selflessness. And here he says, when the disciple, who's the disciple? He who makes the decision in a consistent and persistent way to follow a path that he chose. That's a disciple. When the disciple realizes in his heart, realizes the joy of that path that he does not know afflictions, because everything is transformed in the joy of service, then it will be possible to open, the great portals will open in front of him. So see how the path of service and selfless action will naturally open in front of us, which is the contact with the distant worlds, because the logic of the universe is unity. The logic of the universe is cooperation, is the collaboration between levels, and inside a level with the complementarity. to conclude, he says the following: if we would place all our interest in this, in the selfless action, our life gradually will see miracles. And that selflessness will bring us joy, an unthought joy, which is the highest level of joy, which is to be in front of the smile of God. Let's conclude here with certain impulses of Mother Teresa of Calcutta, and to take that in our consciousness. And who knows if one of these days, because we're very distracted, right? I am using I and we, and so I'm not excluding myself from being distracted. We're very distracted, so maybe during the day, maybe we can be paying more attention to the eyes, not the eyes that also has a second intention, not that eye that is always searching for that which is not needed, but the spontaneity of who is then selfless action and who's willing to serve, willing to identify. Because see, when we come into this yoga of looking at the eyes of others, then something happens. It's like a chemistry that allows the superior energy eventually acts not only through us, but through the other person as well. Why do people feel very accompanied by animals? Because of their eyes, because of their sight. The animal there is interacting with us and profoundly bringing the best of what he has inside of himself to our experience. So to conclude, let's keep in mind looking at the eyes of others, and we'll see what Mother Teresa says. He who loves charity does not go backwards in front of what's unexpected, because knows that Christ is waiting for him beyond the veil. So he who comes into the path of service as in front of which is a need, which is not one's own need, knows this veil exists and it does not have this strength. And something emerges within us that is a little more shocking, and we do like this. So he who loves charity, and charity makes part of this matrix of selfless action. He who loves charity does not go backwards in front of what's unexpected, because he knows that Christ awaits beside or beyond the veil. When we are in front of a suffering, where an impact, let's give ourselves that possibility to give a margin of seconds of silence so that we don't go backwards, and we will be helped to see beyond the veil. He who ascends through charity uses the sacrifice of oneself in front of the need of another. He who waits for me in charity, this me is in her, talking about herself. He who waits for me in charity will find me in the service of those who are in need. He who awaits for me in charity will find me in the vestibule of the poorest of the poor. He who listens, pay attention, is another aspect who's available to all of us. He who listens with charity recognizes the law behind the speeches. See how a selfless action makes our sensibility more tuned to transcend gradually that which is so implanted in our human experience, which are appearances. So here it says, he who listens with charity recognizes the law behind the speeches. He who was touched by the wind of charity will be pushed by me as a ship to a secure port. He who feels through charity assumes in him or herself my heart, and there he or she will discover a source of mercy. If you live in charity, you will live in me. If in charity you search, you will find in me. If in charity you awaken, I will be a light in your path. If in charity you serve, you will recognize my light shining in the center of the afflicted hearts. If you follow me in peace, my steps will turn your path. And last, she says, charity is the solitude of oneself. So let's stay with this impulse. Charity is the solitude of ourselves. Let's take that for each one of us, for oneself, for us as a group, and let's make this reflection. Do we want to come into this path of the solitude of ourselves so I or we can come into a place of service and not in a place of self-affirmation? And again, we will find this heterogeneity from we need a type of experience and something in us needing another type of experience. And all of that is a human experience. All of it makes part of it. So the point is that the proportion that wins inside of us, how much are we going to place on the tray to serve the world and the planet in this moment, which is so critical, such tense and needed moment that the world and the planet is living. So does anyone have a question in this context? A thing that I always think is that people find very easy to have empathy with the suffering of the others when that person is an unknown person to us. Now with the house of San Lázaro, when it's ready, and comes a very suffering person, very ill. But in our day-to-day, with the people that we know, I'm talking about myself, right? We try to measure the suffering of the other based on our own reference. And how is it that when the Friar was talking, I was reflecting in that situation of our group life? How is that path to develop that empathy for the sufferings that are not so apparent? Sometimes the person's not sick visibly, or a wound or something like that, but has that inner suffering. I am not sure if the Friar is understanding where I'm trying to reach. And our tendency to want in the spiritual life that the other also be in a certain place, which is our reference of transcendence, our reference of posture. How do we develop this? It's a very good reflection. What I understand that as humanity, each one of us, we moved away from what is called the spirit of reverence. So what we call sacred, we don't see it because it's an expression of something higher. We treat things and everything with a certain familiarity. We minimize or we diminish things. So inside that context, in this week, so the Lord transforms the light of the universe into a bedside table lamp. So in other words, if we give ourselves that space to minimize everything which is superior, and we start becoming very familiarized with others, and we become very unsensible. I'm going to share very sincerely here. I will talk about this very, very sincerely. I saw myself coming from my own. I was not revering a person that I know, and it was my own consciousness that showed me that. What about the preconcepts that I have? Why I don't even know the person, because we judge by appearance, And seeing that didn't generate any guilt, but it was a touch from my own consciousness. So the solution is always inside of us. Our own decision not to go into that thing that I think that I already know the other person, because we don't even know ourselves. So how can we know the other person? So one day, as such a big suffering can emerge from somebody else, suddenly an inner suffering that is so large, so big, that if we are not in that predisposition to serve, here that's the place of break here. Because if we are not in the yoga or in the constancy of the presence of service, we are still living for ourselves. So it's our reference, as the sister says, something that I already know, or something that I want the other to be just like I am because that's what I know. And then we just run over everything. And that's dangerous in our comprehension, no? In what the sister reflected, because it generates this insensibility and we start becoming cold. So let's see, for example, what happens in a large city, and we stop in a corner and we observe. That's people are just not even looking at each other. Humanity is totally disconnected, very insensible. Poor animal that goes through, nobody even sees it. There's people who have a tree in front of the house, it flowers and everything, and the person does not even notice that it had a tree with flowers. And when somebody comments, the person didn't even realize it. So I can understand the energy of the Mother Teresa of Calcutta. Is if our position is always to serve, is to always to be open to what the other needs, but not what it needs according to our optic and our filter, because maybe it can need something else and I don't know. So how are you going to serve something that you don't know? Well, that's the key. The selfless spirit, the disposition to be of service and to allow that what needs to happen will happen. And there's a key there here, sister. The Trigueirinho one time said, in a situation or in a talk, ask for the guardian angel of the other person to tell you how that person needs to be helped. Because if we don't protect from that, then we will have the tendency to want to give the person what we think that the person needs, which is also very normal, or to think that I know what the other person needs. And it could be that what they need could be the two people can be completely wrong. But in that disposition of spirit to serve and to be vigilant, there's a measure there, and humility can be that measure. That when the other, and that in that moment where the other person needs, that to redimension that I am not greater than the other, or the other is minor than me. It's a rescue, it's a big rescue from the relationships in that code of indifference and when lack of reverence. So when people talk about service, talk about selfless action, of need, there's a parable that Jesus said, when somebody asks you for your mantle, well, give him 2. If somebody calls you to walk for a mile, walk 2 miles. And he's trying to say that the need of the other is much greater. And that's the point. If we would have that spirit to see the need of the other that is much greater than what we can identify, we are going to be very helped not to lose the measure. The measurement is also what we say, what we do. A person said and had a dream. It was a very short period, and yet we already studied about dreams. It's very important to pay a lot of attention in that moment when the door is going to close and you run so that it doesn't shut with you. In that moment when you, in your inner world, sends you a message, is because in that moment the person is awakening, and still the person can perceive the invisible and material, and also can register in your brain. So a person saw a flash, very, very quick. She was at the dentist, and the dentist said, I need to investigate a little bit more because there are some old restorations that we need to change here. And the person awoke. So when a dream like this appears, it's our way of talking. To restore your tooth or something in your mouth is what we say. So in a dream, when somebody is going to study a little bit deeper, no? Because the person is sitting very patiently in the chair, and the person who dreamt it was very quick. She says, no, and the person says, no, I'm fine. We already dealt with everything. And the person says, no, I have to search deeper here, some old thing that is still here. So look how the person was helped to see that what the person is finding about herself or that it's ready. It says, no, you need a little bit more purification. So I understand that sensibility of having the decision, of making the decision that I'm here to serve. I'm serving here just like I am, in this, without measurements. I awaken and I understand that this is my evolutive moment to serve. So we will always be very careful about familiarity to find that we already know the other. So let's observe today, during the day. And it's going to happen very, very soon. As soon as we finish here, I know this person, I already know this energy that I already know. And if we are able to reach a place in observing in perspective, even if this happens simultaneously, our intention is not going to overexpose the side of myself which is less mature. And this is where we see ourselves how we fall again and again and again. That's small in front of the offering. When the decision is correct and sincere, we're going to be helped. We're going to be helped about what is the measure, what is the tone. Let's ask the guardian angel of the other person to talk to us. Trigueirinho says, she would say, when he was going to buy bread, the bread in the bakery, the person would talk about something that Trigueirinho would not even understand why the person was saying that. Something totally common, a daily thing. Hey, today is like this, careful about that. And Trigueirinho would feel the higher vibration in here. So we relate many times with many persons per day, and we're always trying to live the self-affirmation, which is the opposite of renunciation, which is the opposite of abnegation, is the opposite of the point of view. If we are present in the eternal present, it's an intense exercise. Being incarnated, it's intense, and it's intense. The joy of that is because we lose the control finally, gradually, and we feel that we are being helped. Every moment the tone comes, that measurement comes. Right, I came to the point, then it starts flowing. But we have to pay attention. And finalizing here, the reflection is be careful with familiarity. Familiarity is not in intimacy. If I become familiar with you, then even my conduct is not making the other person very comfortable. That's a descending path when we get used to the person. If we thought the whole time that we were in front of Christ, the whole time, Christ himself said, when we were serving the small ones, we would be serving him. If we were in front of him, we would be dealing with people as if they were with a crystal. It's an attitude, no? It's not an excessive thing. There's an attribute also that's a public sharing, no? And it's like we want to listen to something that says, the attribute says, turn your own presence beautiful, but do not overstay. Everything in its right measurement as a constructive element. How do we know what's the right measurement? When you see that you become invisible. When you become invisible to yourself. It's because when something even looks strange, as if we were not even there. Sometimes we think that when we don't see ourselves, then we are not trusting that we are on an impersonal path that we're serving, because something happens and you see that has nothing to do with you. So it's a path, right? Very ample. Now, to pay attention helps a lot so that we don't become we don't become used to things and situations. So in one of these days, in those moments, with the state of grace, we will be there to help. Eventually, we will not even see, and we will maybe not even perceive. Sometimes God is smiling in front of us through the other, and we don't see it, and sometimes we don't even share it, and our judgment is that the person doesn't deserve our attention. It may look like it's harsh, right? But in our subconscious, this attitude is constantly there. So since here we're talking about service in the last moments of their lives, eventually at the end of the incarnation, in extreme suffering, we have to pay a lot of attention, so that we don't get used to that. And this continuous renovation, it's only possible if the people is in the Christic spirit, because he who comes renews all things. Renews or it doesn't renew. If it renews or that he makes new all things, why that we do not transform our life into that, where we transform all things and we turn everything into something new? And we'll see. And maybe that was the moment when, the only time when he would be in front of us. Imagine the opportunity of what we lost, as much to not to receive from the person as to not to let the other person receive something through us. So this is why you don't have to have filters, no, with the person. Purification is important. I don't know if you agree. As we say in Portugal, muito bem. Thank you, everybody. Let's do this yoga of looking at the other's eyes during the day. Also, we can look at the mirror. Let's not look at our hair or hairdo or mustache. No, let's look at our eyes. We are going to discover many things in us and in others. Let's see how our sensibility tunes in and how these collaborators of humanity start by own inner world can help us and turn us into instruments of light. Sometimes with saying nothing, just our presence and being there vigilant without detaching ourselves. Yeah. It's not to look at the other and saying, oh, look, I'm seeing something as mystical, no? Because going to see them with a certain eyes there. No, it's very simple. It's a thing from the heart, something with selfless action, service without expectations. According to the hierarchy, is what opens the doors of these higher worlds. As simple as that. Agree? Okay, in 15 days, we will continue. Thank you, everybody.